Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Robots and Red Tape. As always, I am your host, Nick Schutt. Really, before we get going, I want to thank everybody out there listening. You guys are part of what makes this podcast so fun and so amazing. Love your engagement, love your support. So really just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming and listening and being a part of this community that we're working on building right now. It's just having a great time with it. For folks that don't have the opportunity or haven't had the opportunity to meet my guest today, Bart Maczynski and I met up at Legal Week about a month or so ago up in New York City. I had a really interesting conversation around some of the very interesting tech that he's working on and he's working with now and his background. So, Bart, thank you so much for taking the time to connect today.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me, Nick.
Absolutely, man. So, for folks that haven't had the opportunity to get to know you yet, you mind telling everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of how you got here, man?
Yeah, sure. So I work for RWS. I'm a VP of machine learning there. I lead a team of consultants that work with customers who essentially need their stuff translated, need to project their presence into other cultures and other parts of the world.
Hmm.
I have a pretty long tenure with the tech side of the company. I started around the year 2000 with a company that got absorbed later by RWS when the life was still mostly offline and analog. Um, and I have to admit, I've never fully expected to find ourselves in this spot where the prime protocol for interacting with a machine is natural language, which is where we live now. And I have a degree in literature, so this turn of events delights me.
Hmm. Absolutely, man. No, 100%. That's fascinating. I know that you've, been in tech for a very long time and you've lived through like a lot of like the rule-based and, statistical and statistical and neural, different iterations as they come out. And now there's,
Mhm.
generative AI leading to agentic as well. And in
Mhm.
your opinion, is this moment actually different as it relates to AI, or is it just like the same kind of cycle with better marketing?
So I think with each of those iterations that you mentioned, there was something different about it, and it was palpable difference. Rule-based MT was not really practical. It was so labor intensive to keep all those rules running, verb conjugation, word order, this kind of grammar stuff. Statistical MT was the first enterprise-ready solution. It was very fast, quite accurate, adaptable, could run on a tiny little device as well, like less than a computer, essentially. Neural was a revelation to the whole industry when it came out, mostly because how fluent it was. Used the same transformer architecture that we use now. So in some way, it was a precursor of large language models. Now, with generative AI, what happened, I think it brought the size and the context awareness and the sort of general knowledge of the world, or I guess I should say general knowledge of what humans had written about the world,
Mhm.
to be more precise. And that comes with its own pre-training, right? That changes the game, I think. It remains to be seen what the best implementation is going to be for the kind of practical, everyday enterprise use,
Hmm.
because there's some new challenges that it brings. But it definitely feels better now, or different now, and it's not just hype.
Absolutely, 100%. I know like we talked about RWS, there's a whole lot of translation, right? So you guys translate, I don't know, how many languages is it now?
So this is a bit of a range because for we also offer human translation services, so that's hundreds of languages.
Mhm.
For machine translation, we translate about 60 languages, so to and from, so thousands of combinations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So out of curiosity, what's the difference between, do you see from a work product perspective of human versus machine translation?
So human translation is accurate, fluent, and very slow.
Hmm.
A human can do probably about 2,000 words per day, whereas a simple machine translation system starts with 2,000 words per minute.
Okay.
And we have had some implementations for big customers that demanded the throughput of about 1 million words per minute.
Wow.
So from the pure kind of scale production point of view, you cannot really compare. The question is, can you still operate at scale, but at the same time capture some of that nuance and cultural intelligence and linguistic skill and domain expertise that the human brings to the table? And that is exactly the kind of work that we do here.
Absolutely, man. And how does the that's just what languages are easier to translate? Because I would assume that a lot of it has to do with how many or how much like tagged data there is from a translation perspective, and also culturally, right? Because words mean different things at different times, and they mean different things in
Mhm.
different places. How is it, which languages are easier and which ones are harder, and where do you see that gap? Is it widening or shrinking?
You're absolutely right. So high resource languages, so languages for which there is a lot of written material available, are definitely easier to build into the model.
Hmm.
Um, so if you take languages like I don't know, French or Spanish or Chinese, there's much more material available than say Welsh, which has a relatively small community of native speakers and so on. There may be also differences that are outside of the size of the community, but related to sort of publishing culture. So, for example, there may be more Finnish or Icelandic technical publications than there are in some other languages that
Swahili,
have similar, right?
right?
So this is the challenge for the research community. There are various techniques and methods of making it work. Um, I have to admit, for us the focus is commercial viability. If a customer comes in and says, "I want you to build me a new language," we will do the research, collect the materials, find the people that can help generate the content, and we'll make it happen.
It's amazing, man. No, and do you think that how does your product differ from, like something like, one of these large language models like a ChatGPT or a Claude, who absolutely can do translation, but how does yours differ, and what do you guys bring to the table that these large models that aren't trained specifically for that for translation are what do they miss that you guys capture and vice versa?
So there are two things here, right? So large language models can produce amazing multilingual output, but they are not universally better even than the older generation NMT, so neural machine translation based on simpler architectures, because it depends on the use case a lot. I think they're usually slower, they are more expensive to run, and they are potentially less optimized for accuracy. Um, Large language models are designed to generate, so they are often too eager to please and are more likely to hallucinate. And what's interesting about that is that those don't have to be, obvious nonsensical hallucinations, but things that you don't want to have in translation anyway. So, for example, a model can encounter a very specific technical term when you translate from German to English, and all of a sudden, instead of using the term in a sentence, it will explain it to you, provide the definition, and so on. That's not really what you asked for, but
Mm-hmm.
it somehow at times will do that and feels that it needs to do that.
Mm-hmm.
There's another challenge, and it's not really inherent in the model itself, but how those models are being sold to the market. So a lot of them come from the factory with various guardrails built into them, for alignment. So that's ostensibly to protect the public from harmful content, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in some applications, that's a problem. If you are a law enforcement agency and you're following some bad people online, you want to read their full unfiltered output,
Right.
or however awful that might be. Or if you're, I don't know, a chemical researcher, you don't want the model to censor content because it may be construed as instructions how to make a bomb, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So with dedicated translation models, you don't have that problem because these issues have been engineered out of the model.
Okay, absolutely. And I would assume that they're also more accurate. But yeah, and I think it's fascinating, and I'm sure you agree with this with your background in literature as well, Bart, is that context means everything, right? And there's
Mhm.
many cases where, the culture that the people that are speaking grow up in, and how that changes what words mean to them versus what they mean in broader society or what they meant, 30 years ago. Is that something you guys are able to like, kind of correct for as opposed to, some of these, just off the shelf, like large language models?
Um, yeah, so there are a few things here. One is that large language models tend to have the same kind of internal voice or tone.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to adjust it for specific audiences and especially for different cultures. If you are making a video about, I don't know, encouraging people to exercise in in the United States, maybe this is a very enthusiastic, upbeat, let's do it, and so on. And you translate this straight up to Japanese, and the audience will wonder why this person is yelling at them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a completely different cultural contract that you are entering, and your language has to reflect that. One other thing I would mention, though, because this is something that we see a lot from business leaders that are enthusiastic about generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff seems like it works very well on the kind of samples that they try it on. Um, it seems extremely fluent because it is, but
Mm-hmm.
often that's at it sacrifices accuracy. So this kind of high level fluency, kind of mimicry of the human language can be very insidious if you don't check for accuracy as well.
Absolutely, 100%. I can see how that would be a huge, huge problem if, to your point, you're a law enforcement agency or you're an intelligence agency, right? And the intel agency is doing, is trying to track a terrorist group, right? And how they talk about things can culturally change it, right? And culture, like the culture associated with it, can actually change the meaning of the words, which is okay, I guess, in lower stakes environments, but in the higher stakes environments where people's lives are on the line, you wouldn't want that.
Yeah, certainly. And it's all over the place. It's actually interesting because, you could roughly divide the world of translation into two buckets. One is translating my own stuff. So I'm a company, I'm going out with a message. I want to sell a product. I own that message. This is my content. I can dial in just the right tone for each of the markets I want to be present in.
Hmm.
But then the other bucket is I need to gain insights about the world from the signal that is coming in. You mentioned the crime investigation, digital forensics, media exploitation, sentiment analysis, and all of that. You don't control what's coming your way. You
Hmm.
have to understand, you have to detect the signal no matter what it is. So it's very important to actually have an accurate translation approach there.
Hmm. Absolutely, I'm sure. And what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've seen, people have around how translation actually works at scale inside global organizations?
I think the scale is the interesting part because People just think it's words per minute, right? But if you look at a fairly large enterprise, there are pockets of content everywhere. There can be hundreds of content repositories. There can be thousands of content types, external facing, internal facing. Think of making a car and going to market. You have to have all sorts of certificates. You have to have the driver's manuals, but there's the maintenance manuals. There are parts catalogs. There's marketing material. There are commercials that go out. And all of these types of materials are developed just to support the launch of this one artifact, right? So there may be tens of thousands of stakeholders involved in an enterprise producing content, and nobody really knows what's going on outside of their business unit.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, it's usually easier to pay someone outside the company to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And if that someone is incentivized to maximize their services profit, then you end up over translating a lot of content, right? So you have this false assumption that only human linguistic effort can deliver the quality that's needed. And that's not true. The solution is to sort of optimize the process for desired business outcomes, not for linguistic outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we see like what so obviously translating your material and bringing it into a new market is huge, right? Are those some of the primary use cases, or what kind of use cases do you generally approach, and what do you guys see within the market, and how do companies apply your technology, and like what problems are they
Mhm.
genuinely trying to solve?
We operate within three types of use cases generally, and there are many different subtypes of use cases. So the one prime use case is the use case that the translation industry itself operates in, and that is localization. So taking your product, your voice, your brand to market. This is the game there is essentially uh, speeding up, making more efficient the human translation process.
Hmm.
So either by providing first draft of translations or translating the whole thing and then just asking translators to post-edit or review and so
Hmm.
on. So there's amazing progress in that space. The second type is what we mentioned before. So this is the use case where um, you essentially listen to the world, and the world provides you with material that you need to process. The way I like to think about it is making other systems multilingual, because you may have your e-discovery platform that is operating in a single language. You make it multilingual. There is I don't know, digital forensics platform. There's complaint management platform, maybe pharmacovigilance platform for pharma.
Hmm.
All of these are built to detect signals in most cases in a single language, and we kind of flatten the hill for them. We convert everything to English. This use case is very different because you don't care as much about fluency here. You want accurate translations that can scale very, very high speed, very big throughput. And there are also peripheral functions that are like, do I always know what language this is? So maybe I need to do language detection as well, right?
Hmm.
And the third use case is interesting because it's business use case where you have an enterprise or an organization operating across language barriers. You have professionals on a day-to-day basis, but they are not allowed to use publicly available translation, cloud translation solutions because of intellectual property restrictions, data residency restrictions. They don't want to lose trust of their customers and so on. So we come in with what we call secure enterprise translation portal.
Hmm.
We built it into your infrastructure. We even have an option to run it on premise
Hmm.
if you want to. So we can deploy it in almost any country.
Hmm.
And you can have your own models with your own dictionaries that are, closer to your own domain. And you can rest assured that the data is not going to go anywhere. So these are the three main use case categories where we operate, and we've seen success in all three of them.
Absolutely. I'm sure considering you guys have been at this for so long, you're seeing success in all of them. And now, I mean, how do companies, at like the tactical level, how do companies bring you their data? Do they just like, do they just give you PDFs? Like, do they upload printed things? Like,
Mm.
and because like as I think about this, and I think about, AI products in general and how they're deployed, right? A lot of times people and people make assumptions around, data being cleaner than it actually is, right? And more structured than it actually is, and that can affect output, right? So I would assume that there's some kind of, ontology or taxonomy layer you're building into all of this. How does that work, and how do you deal with clients that have messy data as opposed to clean data?
So this is a very complex question, but I'll try to handle it.
Hmm.
So first of all, for people from outside of the translation industry, one thing that may be new is that um, a human translation process generates a structured bilingual artifact known as translation memory.
Hmm.
So this is a database of sentences that have been translated and approved by humans. And over pretty much every big customer has them, or their vendors have them. And over time, these translation memories can grow and grow and have hundreds of thousands of sentences in them. And in fact, a few years ago, when we built a new generation of our system, we
Hmm.
said, well, we want to train these models on customer translation memories. Well, how big can they grow? We will allow them to be up to 3 million examples, which seemed like a lot at the time. And then about a month later, a customer rolled through the door who had 26 million examples in their translation memory, and we had to redesign the platform. I had never seen such a big TM before, and it turned out it was media and entertainment script
Hmm.
translation that had a lot of examples. So that makes it easy for the translation industry, perhaps in ways that's easier than many other industries that are now working with AI, that we have access to this structured data. But then you have cases where you don't have that.
Hmm.
You may have just some examples. You may have a general sense of the domain. In cases like that, we would use other ways. We could generate synthetic data. We could use context engineering to fine-tune the model for a particular domain.
Hmm.
And I think no matter how you do that, what's really important is that you design an evaluation framework to see if your method is performing. That's really key and sometimes missing from solutions.
Yeah, and how do you what do you think about the viability of synthetic data versus real data, and how does that and how does that affect the accuracy of the translation? What have you seen as it relates to that part?
I mean, there are some risks there, but those risks are not greater than using a bad translation memory, for
Hmm.
example, right? Because even, if you look at the last 15 years of translation history for a given enterprise, well, if they are a successful enterprise, their landscape of their product and solutions did not stand still. There was some evolution there, maybe even revolution. So there is a domain drift in the translation memory. So there's always a chance that the system the data you train your system on is not the data you end up using the system on in the
Hmm.
future. I think that now with large language models, nobody's going to use large data to retrain the model for a particular domain. And there are other techniques like retrieval augmented, in this case, translation, that can steer the model performance in a particular direction. Um, but also prompt engineering goes a long way. You can very quickly arrive very close to where you want to be by just some experimentation and iteration. I think what's really critical is having the right people to do it, the people that can understand the sort of cultural nuance or the domain specialty, and rather than just a bunch of engineers trying to make it work.
Hmm. Absolutely. No, 100%. And I think it's really interesting to see how these different implementations and the different styles of implementation are actually being played out in real time, right? And I know that like LLMs and agentic solutions are like the really, really hot thing right now. Everybody's talking about them. I think at Legal Week, I don't think they could have squeezed AI anywhere else and put it in any more places. Everybody was talking about that, right?
That's right.
But like
That's right.
everybody's talking about LLMs and agentic Bart, but as somebody that's like, you're a serious AI professional, right? You've been doing this in data analytics for a long time. And there's a whole other stack of tools, right? Like whether we talk about, graph models, yeah, NLP pipelines, retrieval systems, classification models, right? What are you guys using to power your system? And is it just LLMs or are you using other more specialized tools as well?
So we have maybe the first distinction we need to make is between the models themselves and everything else. This is kind of one of the first things that people learn when they come to um, talk about translation is that, and this is perhaps why many um, out of industry attempts to improve translation fail, is that it's not just text in, text out. There are a lot of steps before and after translation that need to work in order for the whole thing to work. So, for example, you need to be able to connect to the content repository where the content lives. You have to understand the structure of the content. If it's a PDF, you need to extract the content from it, or if it's an image, or if it's a video. All of these technologies are available, but they have to be evaluated and how they work together with all the other parts. Then you have the model itself, and we have now two different types of models. We have models that we call fast. They are built on the uh, neural machine translation architecture that we developed in-house,
Hmm.
that scale very well. They support a lot of languages. They have small footprints, so you can deploy them on smaller devices, even laptops. And now we have the new generation of models that we call Pro. Hence, Language Weaver Pro is our new offering. And these we built in collaboration with our partner Cohere, foundational model house. And they were fine-tuned for translation. So rather than take multilingual model and that also dabbles in translation, we basically designed and built and fine-tuned multilingual translation model with Cohere.
Hmm. Okay. No, absolutely. 100%. That makes a lot of sense. And how does like a successful implementation of this actually look in practice, like as opposed to just being in a demo?
I think a lot of the success depends on how you measure success, right? So um, I think for our customers, it's often difficult to define what they want to achieve. Um, I always encourage them to look at the business outcomes, things like reduction of support tickets going to a human and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. Um, in many aspects, it doesn't really differ much from what any other business process is. It's just that with AI, there's so much hype surrounding it, and there's so much pressure coming from executive teams. Hey, let's just check this AI box. Um, is that people fall into this trap that um, the prototype works well or the pilot works well, or you see, oh, it solves 80% of the problem very, very quickly, but then they see that the remaining 20% using AI is actually very, very hard to solve.
Hmm.
And we've had customers coming back after a year of trying to experiment on their own and said, you know what, guys, you were right, maybe we need a little bit of help here.
Hmm. Absolutely. No, yeah, and you mentioned like that last 20%, right? And I think that's okay in some cases, right? But when you look at highly regulated spaces, whether you're talking like pharma, legal, if you're talking like DoD or IC work or DoD or intelligence community work, right? I don't, is that level, like what's the fail rate? What's the acceptable fail or hallucination rate as it relates to these translations?
So nobody wants hallucinations.
Hmm.
um, I mean, the generally, even if you look at specific industries, even if you look at a single content type, um, it's the use case that determines your tolerance for risk. And I'll give you an example. Um, let's say you ask me, well, what about a legal contract, right? So if you are translating a legal document that has to stand up in the court of law, well, of course, you need probably certified human translation.
Hmm.
But if you're translating 3,000 contracts to find, which ones follow a particular pattern because you want to detect fraud in them, then you have a different risk tolerance altogether. It's still the same type of document, right? It's
Hmm.
just a completely different purpose in this use case.
Hmm.
Um, there is, though, a debate in the industry on how to measure that, how to approach that. It's a very valid kind of open discussion right now.
Hmm. Absolutely. And is that just, I think that just reiterates the need for like having a human in the loop and having a human reviewer on this, right?
Yes, and this is another robust discussion in the industry. Are we endangering the profession of a translator? Are we moving to fewer translators and all of that? And
Mhm.
did digital photography reduce the number of photographers, or did it increase it? Right?
Well, the
Everybody
proliferation of
snaps.
cameras on your phone increased it
Yeah,
drastically, right?
exactly. But it's a different type of photographer. Then that's why we need a different type of language expert. We need specialists in cultural intelligence, people who can provide the human touch where the machine falls short. I think the industry needs to rethink the skills that it has and the way it monetizes them, because it already possesses those skills, but they were used to charge per word for translation, and that
Hmm.
world is going away.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And so do you think that it's just that we're moving towards a different, like, it's not that we're going to have less translator jobs. We're just going to have different kinds of translator jobs as it relates to the industry. Because I think there's still going to be do you think that there's still always going to be a need for a human in the loop as it relates to translation? Or do you think as we continue to improve the models themselves, at some point we just won't need humans in the loop as it relates to translation?
It's an interesting question. So I think that, on LinkedIn and elsewhere, every day I read compelling arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
With even within our company, I mean, we are the largest non-governmental employer of professional linguists. I think it generally depends on the use case as well, but it's definitely diminishing, especially in fields like technical translation. A lot of professionally published materials these days, that the kind of content that accompanies products, they get translated with minimal or no human intervention.
Hmm.
But there is maybe a promise in there as well, so that translators will not be asked to translate boring stuff,
Hmm.
and they will be able to use the skill that they have to its potential, and
Hmm.
um, maybe you will be more rewarded for work that you do and the skill that you put into the work, um, based not just on your professional linguistic experience, but also who you are, what your life experience has been, what your relationship with the product is or experience of the product is. So this kind of um, micro targeting of translation is going to produce a new demand for the translation delivery.
Yeah, and do you guys do like live so obviously I can give you a whole bunch of stuff to translate. You can do that. It's like, what do you think about like having or do you guys have like apps where you and I could have conversations speaking different languages and just translate in real time? Is that doable? Or and how do
Yes.
you go ahead?
Yeah, it's doable. The key is here, what other parameters in your use case you also have to um, um, obey. So the, it's relatively easy to build this, say, on your phone and then dial into basically a cloud server somewhere and do the heavy lifting. But if you are a border patrol officer or a law enforcement officer and you are interviewing a witness of some crime, and you, or if you are, speaking with allies and on the battlefield, you cannot use a cloud system, right? So how do you do that? How do you package your speech to text to your transcription service, your translation service, sometimes multilingual, and your speech generation service into a single workflow in such a way that it works seamlessly?
Hmm.
This is what we're working on. We're coming up with we call it a secure multilingual interview kit. We are packaging it onto a single laptop that will allow people to go to a room and have a secure multilingual conversation
Hmm.
without any internet connection.
That's fantastic. Oh, that's absolutely fantastic. And I think that that's like as you think about, the proliferation of wearables, right? And wearable technology, is like why can't, my AirPods listen to you talking in a different language
Mhm.
and just automatically translate it and feed it into my ear, right? Like, and also why can't you put the same tone on it and the same, as well? Does it have to be austere? I don't know. Austere is not the right word. Flat, maybe? What's the right word? What's the word I'm looking for,
Ro-
Bart?
Robotic, I think,
That's it.
maybe.
That's one of them.
Right.
But yeah, that one works.
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
Mm,
no, you're absolutely right. And there are many attempts already to solve this problem. Most of them rely on the cloud doing the heavy lifting. But I'm a technology enthusiast. I believe that all of these kind of engineering side of things are going to be solved. Like the models will be smarter and smaller and less demanding of compute and less expensive to run and so on. We just need to learn how to implement that within the whole solution.
Do you think that's more done like as a small language model that you can run locally on like on an iPhone or something, as opposed to having to require cloud connection? And is that something that's doable now?
I think it's the future. We will see applications for smaller language models, definitely. I run a few smaller models on my various computers at home, and for the kind of things I need them for, they perform well enough, and I don't have to subscribe to another system.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. I think small language models are the way of the future. And um where do you think the value is shifting from translation itself? Do you think value is shifting from like, translation itself to, workflow orchestration and data and infrastructure? Or do you think that it's like how do you see that kind of playing out and how do you see, and do your customers and your clients understand the importance of their data infrastructure?
I think they begin to understand this, or they are in the process of gaining more, maybe not understanding, but appreciation of what it is that makes them what they are. You can think of any enterprise as a sort of a being or an entity embedded in content that they produce. That this is the differentiator, and it doesn't have to be just marketing, right? But
Hmm.
there are some there's marketing copy that I could read to you without the brand, and you would immediately point to the right company. Um, a lot of companies operate in industries and have to differentiate themselves from their peers, even if they speak very technical language. And they have not been doing a very good job managing those assets. They have um, a lot of decentralized material that just floats there and is not really often utilized. And the other aspect of this is if you just take an off-the-shelf large language model that was trained on publicly available material, you may have material in-house within the confines of your IT infrastructure that were never exposed on the internet, that the model has never seen. So how do you use this material to fine-tune the model? Is that what you want to do? How do you convey um, that that special something that describes your business that you only keep in your vaults in order to make the model understand your business as well? And I think that is going to be the next kind of shift. It goes beyond translation. It's about enterprise identity. It's about conceptual makeup of what this line of business is. And it's a very fascinating sort of widening of experience for us as well, because we will be working on new types of projects that go way beyond translation.
Absolutely. And do you think that the where do you see the in this highly specialized space, Bart? Do you see where do you think the real competitive advantage is for organizations like RWS and other folks out there? Is it in the model itself, or is it in the underlying data that you use to train the model?
Mhm, mhm. Um, I don't think it's in the model itself, but the model is indispensable. I think that data is important, but it belongs to the customers, right? So I
Mhm.
think the mechanism by which you make that connection is going to be the differentiator, which is to say, can you demonstrate that by using your model and your infrastructure, you can take the full advantage of the unique data that the customer has in their possession without at the same time, endangering the data in any way, making it less secure and so on. I think the sort of adaptability, the context engineering, all this kind of stuff, together with the human cultural experience layer, are going to make a difference.
Absolutely. And how do you build in a human cultural layer and a human cultural experience within these models? And how are you able to do that, considering how even across the same language, the culture shifts drastically?
Yeah, this is this is actually area of very active research right now,
Hmm.
mm, because for the first time, large language models sort of opened up this world to us. I think the most important thing is to define the framework with a set of parameters you want to measure content against. There may be different types of culturally relevant parameters that you may not think about. But let's say, is this culture more individualistic or is it more group oriented, right? Is a sports metaphor more important in this culture, or is the business metaphor more important, right? I remember when I first came to the US some 20 some years ago, there were all those sports metaphors based on sports I never really watched or understood, like baseball metaphors and football metaphors that meant nothing to me. I had to adjust and learn, something out of the left field and drop the ball, and um, it it's this is something that you can teach the model, and you basically say, okay, if you go to Japan or Poland or Spain and you want to use a metaphor to express something about your product, you're not allowed to use the metaphor that relates to this particular sport because that sport is unknown there. You need to find a functional equivalent of that in the target culture and use that.
Hmm.
And how you encode it in the model in your system, that's $1 million question, maybe $1 billion question.
Absolutely, I'm sure. And are questions like this why these small language models like like Language Weaver are so much more important compared to the large models that are doing everything?
So I mean, we have now sort of moved past the small language model in some ways, especially with the Cohere partnership.
Hmm.
But we still build the model for one particular type of action, which is translation. But it is on that basis that we can build all this other infrastructure. So we're not going to do, we're not building vision models. We're not building self-driving cars, right?
Right.
We're not detecting anomalies in X-rays.
Hmm.
We work with natural language and
Hmm.
everything that pertains to it. I think one of the advantages that we have is this whole human capital and all those skilled linguists that can help us navigate that.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, 100%. So, as you think about, you're talking to folks that are out here and, and are looking at, translation services, like what's the value of for them to working with somebody like an RWS as that's a highly specialized, highly niche tool as opposed to one of these larger models that's trained to do a lot of different things.
Right. Well, I would say that you invested a lot in your business in making it what it is and projecting your brand to the world. And part of it was generating all the content that makes you what you are. And we appreciate that. We don't think that one size fits all. And that's why more custom, adaptive, specialized, fine-tuned approach is better for you.
Absolutely. No, 100%. Bart, is there anything else you'd like to add? Is there anything I missed, as in this conversation?
I don't think so. I would want to point out, though, that you know what's really different, and maybe this is kind of a bookend to the conversation that we started with, sort of from this direction. You ask what's really different about this generative AI
Hmm.
thing is that I think for the first time we feel that the translation technology is coming from outside of the translation industry or academia and so on. It's the big business that suddenly took interest in language and created large language models. And this is a blessing for us in some ways because we have access to all this wonderful technology, but it can be a curse for our customers because it creates providers with claims to know about language where really they are just tech providers and don't have any linguistic expertise that can be projected onto their product. And that's where we can help bridge the gap.
Absolutely. No, 100%. And that makes a lot of sense, especially as you think about the nuances around language, right? And how much is communicated, in language and how that, how important it is to be precise with the words. It's not about using any word that works, it's about using the right word and the best word, right? And so to make sure you're conveying your meaning. So I really appreciate that, Bart. And man, I really appreciate you coming on today. I think it was a really interesting conversation around some, nuts and bolts related to AI and this very specific use case, man.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And everybody out there, thank you so much for listening to Robots and Red Tape. As always, I am Nick Schutt, and I hope you're having a wonderful day.